Well, thank you very much for anyone who is joining. Good morning. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and thank you for that introduction. Without further ado, I'm going to stop the video so that we can actually go over to the presentation itself. Just bear with us 2 seconds whilst we do that. Okay. Great. So as Nisha said, I will be talking about the Independent Living Program, which is what we do at our Child and Youth Care Centre. And I think it's a very important topic because it's actually a very new item when it comes to what we see now from the Department of Social Development, but it's something that a lot of us have been doing for a very long time when it comes to child and youth care. So this is my presentation on a CYCC approach to independent living. And first off, I just want to introduce us to some of the theory and policy when it comes to independent living. So if we look at the Children's Act, which we know is our guideline to all of our the programs of CYCCs are meant to enhance the well-being of children to become functional in communities. There are developmental programs. It highlights life skills, independent living, aftercare, income generation. These activities are focused on developing the child to be ready for life outside of the centre and empowering them to be independent, resilient, and ambitious, regardless of past living circumstances. One of the CYCC's key programs is the Independent Living Program, teaching independent strategies and skills for children to grow into responsible adults. So first off, it's set out in the Children's Act, which is something that we use as the baseline and guideline for our own activity, development, and policy structure in the CYCC system. When we move forward and we look at the need for independent living program, now this actually arises when we look at the challenges experienced by care leavers, those leaving a care system, a CYCC, or any other care system internationally. Because often leaving residential care, young people are expected to successfully live independently, even though many decisions in their life were made for them and they have not been prepared for adulthood. Therefore, the outcome from that is that young people leaving the care system can be insufficiently equipped with the skills, resources, and capacities that they need to face the challenges of living independently. And some of the recent statistics show that only 35% of child and youth care centres can actually provide supervised spaces. And when I say that, I mean residential spaces where independent living skills can be acquired. And there is obviously a need for funding to be able to facilitate such services. As we move forward, going on to the next slide, we're looking at the components of independent living. There has been a lot of research done. This is also adapted from some research that I came across. But if we look at research in regards to independent living and the key components, we can see that providing the space and infrastructure to develop independent living skills while in the care system. So actually having a dedicated independent living space, being able to acquire skills and competencies, being able to access developmental and therapeutic support. I think it's very important to understand that this is an extension of what we do for children. And we will talk about that later, but when we talk about the IDP and the services rendered to children, we actually adapt them for the independent living age group. Providing access to positive adult relationships, providing support in developing resource networks, and providing access to ongoing support and development once the young person transitions out of the care system. And for me, this is a very important aspect. We will talk about it a little bit further on, but the aftercare component is essentially vital when it comes to the success of independent living. If we move forward and we look at this is just one model which I think is familiar for many people working in CYCCs. If we look at the Children's Act, we have a duty to provide therapeutic, developmental, recreational, and caring services to children and young people alike. I also include outreach on there because that links to generosity and encouraging our young people to be able to give back. And it links to the IDP areas when we are talking about belonging, talking about independence, talking about mastery, and talking about generosity. And we must understand that this is often age and phase related. And what I mean by that is that we can be doing an IDP for a child in the ECD section when we're talking about mastery and we're talking about them, for example, being able to do up their shoelaces. But then when we get onto this age range, we're looking at them being able to do their own CV, for example, and being prepared for a job interview. So it's being able to actually adapt these models to the age and phase and stage of development that we are looking at. And as I said, this also includes more specific tasks for the young people themselves, because whereas with the children, it's a lot of things that we are going to do for them. For the young people, it's about goal attainment and actualization and things that they may be actually doing themselves. Moving forward and continuing at looking at how this applies in practice, we must first acknowledge the need to provide an independent living program residentially at the center to equip school leavers with the needed life skills for the transition period to be able to function independently in the community, and as they transition into adulthood, further education and work opportunities. Underpinned by the ideology that the youth of today become the adults of tomorrow. So that's where we have longer term residential care beneficiaries, where the option to remain within a CYCC program is in the best interest of that specific young person, and for them to then be able to contribute positively towards society. Services are designed to help a young person's transition from alternative care to living independently as productive citizens through structured life skills and educational programs. My own stance on this is that if we actually do not provide this, and we have a young person who, for example, turns 18 and then is considered an adult, and we no longer are able to accommodate adults at our center, but they are not prepared to actually integrate back into the community, then we can have a problem, because they can end up going the wrong way, which can actually really be a waste of what we have invested in them for all of the years previously. And I think that's a very important thing to think about, because we are investing in these young people from whatever age that we have them in. So if we let them go too soon, they can end up costing more in the long run, and what we have actually invested in them can end up being wasted. But it can have to be on a case-by-case basis. Continue on this, looking at what is a CYC independent living program. What does it focus on? What are the practical elements of this? Basically, first off, we're looking at further education and training to improve career and future employment prospects. This is basically enrolling kids into higher education when needed, vocational training when needed, that they can actually better themselves and go on to study further, young people even studying on the university level. And also that we have internal life skills available at our center as well, that is more applicable to adulthood. So here we're looking at things around substance abuse prevention, responsible parenting, mental health, and skills that will help them in real life. Hard skills, artisan skills, vocational training, soft skills, computer lessons. It's vital to equip the children with technical skills in this point in time, providing opportunities internally, where they can explore their personal interests, things around maintenance, hospitality, animal care, vegetable gardening, things that we may be able to do at the center, cooking, for example, practical independent living skills, preparing the children and young people to be able to actually manage a household, for example. So that's around financial management, budgeting, personal health, nutritional knowledge, healthy lifestyles, problem solving, goal setting, dealing with things around stress, work-based opportunities, which we'll discuss a little bit more later on as well. But it's important for the young people to be able to look at employment options so that they can actually have some savings that can help them forward into the future, involvement in volunteering, community services, work readiness programs, and even driving lessons, because that can also be an essential skill for many of our young people. But I do know it can be based on what resources and support is available, because some of these programs essentially do need funding for them to consider. Moving forward onto the next slide, we're looking at some of the practical considerations around independent living. And here it's where social service practitioners, which includes child and youth care professionals working with children in care, need to create opportunities for children to implement interactional processes in the real world, and not merely in the counseling room, in the office, or the safety of the CYCC. Really looking at what it means to be independent, and therefore there is a need to allow them to take developmentally age-appropriate risks in the world outside of the CYCC, an interactional approach to resilience, providing support in navigating their broader communities, feeling connected, developing resource networks, and becoming secure in their identity outside of an alternative care setting. And I think for me, this is where we have to take the CYCC and the child, or the young person in this instance, as a beneficiary of the CYCC. And we must also see them as part of their identity, but also as a member of the community where they have came from, where they were born, and actually putting those things together to see where they can work hand in hand, that the two can work together, that they're not actually separate, that they can be part of one and still part of the other. And I even talk about things with our young people in terms of being interdependent, because all of us, even us now listening to this presentation, we have people that we can rely on for support when we need that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Why should we be in a mindset where we don't rely on other people and we have to rely purely upon ourselves? There is something in that notion of interdependence, which I think can be explored on a wider basis. Forward again, and continuing on practical considerations. And this is all based on things that we have experienced from our own child and youth care centre, where we currently have about 10 young people within the independent living programme. A child and youth care centre can claim for beneficiaries, which is through the Department of Social Development, when they're over 18 to the year in which they turn 21, as long as they are in education and training. And this is through Section 176 of the Children's Act. But what I want to add to that is that as a CYCC, we are encouraged to provide income generating opportunities, which is part of the recommended practice, but the young person can only be a beneficiary whilst not in employment, because as soon as they are earning a certain amount, they are no longer to be considered a beneficiary of the centre. And it's a point to look at, which I've put here, because we recently, for example, had one case where we have a young person who is unable to manage his own finances, and he is working, but therefore no longer approved as a beneficiary of the Department of Social Development. And I think it's important that we look at these things, because now he is someone who is being targeted, for example, by people outside who wants to be able to get his savings that he's saved up from the work that we arranged for him. But the center no longer has any legal care over that young person because of the fact that he's earning a certain amount. And it's just something for all parties to consider that we can look at, because sometimes these long-term beneficiaries actually rely a lot on the support that can be given to them, especially if they might have intellectual challenges, for example. Carrying on from this, the role of the case manager is something to look at. When I say that, I mean the external social worker. It fluctuates on a case-by-case basis, but post-18, the involvement of the case manager can be minimal. There's a lot of emphasis on the internal social work team, those here at the center, those working in residential care to try and achieve the positive outcomes for them. Aftercare services, which also links to this, are not carried out. We try and assist at the CYCC to follow up in cases. There needs to be community-based mentors. That is something that is lacking. There also needs to be accommodation options for these young people, because I often try and change their mindset so that they can actually think of being able to work towards or save towards having their own accommodation option when they leave the center. So essentially, they don't go back to the environment where they were removed from in the first instance, because they can still actually support the family there, but actually be living independently, which is something we need to all work at collectively, because there are a lot of role players at play. And another thing that I've added here is that young people 18 plus who could benefit from the programs offered residentially but are not in care, is there a way in which they can be considered? Because no mechanism exists for an 18-year-old who was never in care, who might benefit from an independent living program, to actually be enrolled in one. And this includes young people from rural communities. We're also doing work in a rural community, and I know there are young people there who would love to have the opportunity to be able to be in a place where they could get training and further education. Those without visible support, even previous care leavers whose placements have broken down. Currently, we are not able to support such cases independently. We most recently had a young girl, for example, who left our center about 8 years ago, and now she's an adult, and she could come back in, and we supported her as a CYCC to be able to do her studies and attend to all of those things. But there was no way through legal channels that we could actually apply for her to be a beneficiary. And I think that's something that also needs to be looked at. And I think this actually links very nicely to aftercare. And when we're looking at aftercare, we need to look at the international recognition for interdependence, as I mentioned earlier, is supported by the philosophy of Ubuntu, as reflected by the International Association of the School of Social Work, which asserts that far from being autonomous and independent beings as constructed by liberal theory, as human beings, we are all embedded in societies and dependent on their social, political, economic, and cultural structures and conventions. Whilst the Children's Act permits youth to remain in care beyond 18 years of age, the policy of rules of different CYCCs does not always allow this. So there are some anomalies between legislation and practice. The assertion that young people are ready by 18 or even by 21 to leave alternative care takes away from the work that can be done to ensure the young people become the best possible version of themselves. If sufficient time and opportunity is given, they can go on to help their own families and communities when given an extension of time in a supportive, less restrictive residential environment. And my own recommendation here is that we look at that up until the age of 25. And what I want to say is that that does not take away from the need for reunification. We have to look at this on a case-by-case basis, because there are young people who can stay in a CYCC for 1 year, 2 years, and we can work very hard to get them back into a supportive family environment. But there are those young people who are orphaned from highly impoverished environments who we need to look at a longer term approach to. So actually, in such cases where there might also be intellectual disability or otherwise affecting them, it's actually unfair in a sense to say that they need to be ready by a certain age to go out there and function, as we say, independently. This also combats negative outcomes. One study found that 27% of care leavers were involved in some kind of criminal activity during their first 5 years after aging out of care, but that 18% were involved in regular criminal activities. And this is per the Social Development National Guidelines. And yes, I think it goes to what I said earlier about not wanting to waste the money that is invested in these young people for many years. As we carry on, I've got some case studies that I wanted to share in brief. Young people, even though they are not named, have consented for these things to be shared. But I want to give different aspects when it comes to this program. So the first one is young person A, admitted in 2010, had been in another children's home. Both parents passed away. We identified family members to be involved in his life. He finished at matric, he could study further. He got a bursary to study business management, went on to do a logistic management's diploma. He employed as a waiter at a local restaurant. He was able to go through his cultural initiation. His younger sister remained in care till the age of 21. And this young person benefited from the support of the centre till the age of 24 and remained involved with agricultural projects at our centre linked to his studies. And I'm giving this example because I think it's very important we remember that in a lot of instances, siblings are admitted to a child and youth care centre, sibling groups or siblings, and therefore we have to try and keep them together, because that family bond is sometimes the most vital family bond that they have. So therefore, when we have a situation where there is a young person who is getting into his 20s, for example, are we going to say he must leave and the other young person must stay? And it's just something that we must consider going forward when we look at shaping the policy of independent living. There's another case of siblings that I've got on the screen now. This is another one admitted in 2010, age 12, but this time with his brother, age 6, orphaned, was found alone in a squatter camp. He missed out on schooling. We got him into an ALSAN class. We, as in the Child and Youth Care Centre, identified wider family members to be involved in his life after 3 years without family contact. We went to the squatter camp and yeah, it took a lot, but we managed to find some family for him. He did a skills course, woodwork and upholstery. He was extended further under Section 176. And now age 23, he remains part of the program because his brother, who's at a special school, is 17, still here attending that in high school. And we were able to get this young person a job as a general assistant at a primary school during COVID-19, which allowed him to extend the shack in the squatter camp where his uncle stays so that he could build an extension that will be suitable for him and his young brother. And again, as I said earlier, this is where you look at the notion that the CYCC and the community can work together rather than separate. So that child is still part of his family, or the young person is still part of his family and the community where he comes from, but through the CYCC, he can have the opportunity to truly be able to live an independent life. The next one is one of our female success stories. A girl admitted to us 2011, sent by her parents to work on the street. She was exposed to substances from an early age, a cycle of abuse, older siblings in prison, drug addicted, involved in prostitution. Her mother died whilst at the center. Her father is street homeless. She's done extremely well. She's currently doing a level 4 hospitality and catering course. She's in an independent living flatlet that we have here at the center. She's applying to do a diploma. She's also shared her life story on the radio and in the newspaper. But while she's here, we've been able to assist her as a professional team and through volunteers that we have to attend to issues with the family, such as her father's SASA card being kept with a loan shark, her older sister having a baby that needed to be taken into the care of the wider family. So she stays here, but she maintains regular contact. And the last one, which is somewhat different, is a young person aged 12 who had a terrible background in terms of drug addiction and was referred from a rural area. And we supported him a lot therapeutically. He was very motivated academically, also through his sport, became a school prefect, played first team rugby, went to Durban with that. But we also allowed him, whilst he was at the center, to have positive relationships through his friends at school and maintain contact with the parents so that he could actually have a weekend where he could go to visit a friend. And those things were very important because eventually it allowed him to move into the care of holiday parents when he started university at NMU. So at 19, he was able to go into the community and commence his university studies. And I think that's where it's important that we're looking at it on a very much case-by-case basis. There are some photos here that the young people consented for us to use of our young adults, just to add a face to what we are talking about here. Also, voices of the young people talking positively about what we have taught them, talking to them about business management, helping them to save, helping them to spend wisely. Also, another young person here who said he was very pleased to be helped to finish his cultural practice and that he will be going back to the community one day and able to know what to do when he is there. And talking on that, I think that's where cultural considerations are very important, remembering that CYCCs are characterized by diversity. We must remember that when it comes to cultures, heritage, and languages. CYCCs strive to accommodate every child's culture, but there can be inadequate resources at times. It's very, very important that the cultural sensitivities, expectations, and adaptations are considered in planning for young people, and staff must be empowered and equipped. For example, we have had young people who have gone to the bush and actually returned to our center, and we've supported them through their Mgidi and other ceremonies that have taken place. But to be able to come back to the center, of course, it's very important that they are respected and accepted as a young man and no longer being referred to in a way that would be offensive. And it's important for all of us to be empowered and upskilled in those areas as well. Here's one theoretical model, and I know we're running a little short of time, so this is just one model that I found, which I think is very important when it comes to this notion of striving for authentic belonging. So the last slide that we go to before we have any questions is looking at the theoretical models. So when we talk about striving for authentic belonging, we're talking about the relationships, meaningful relationships, networking people for goal attainment, which links to actual permanency planning and forming lifelong relationships that can benefit the young people when they leave. Contextualized responsiveness, focusing on the social environments of the young people. Following on from that, having a resource-rich social environment so that we can actually help the young people to become self-confident, high-functioning and attaining adults. All of us need to create opportunities for children to implement these interactional processes in the real world. our young people need to be prepared and able to do things for themselves so that we do not do anything forward. Policy is needed to leverage the financial resources needed to provide the structures. And lastly, a CYCC can be a crucial resource in helping to ensure a young person can transition successfully as adults. We can be a crucial resource in helping to ensure a young person can transition successfully as adults. Moving on, these are the references, and I think that is time now, as I hand back to the moderator, Nisha, for our comments and questions. Email is on there. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you so much, Harrison, for that presentation and such a critical topic that you covered. And I love the case studies. So thanks for that. At this stage, I just welcome the audience to please post any questions or comments in the chat. In the meanwhile, while we wait for them, I just had two quick questions. Is there a toolkit? Oh, no, that's not the right word, but rather a detailed guideline maybe that CYCCs can access that has, those steps, all those things that you mentioned in your slides that can capacitate and empower them to have a more comprehensive independent living program?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Nisha. There was a guideline that was formulated from the Department of Social Development. It is available. It gave a lot of the background to their rationale behind wanting CYCCs to have an independent living program. And it actually highlights lots of the things that are expected there to be looked at. So that document, that paper is available. And I can also make it available. I'm not a departmental official, but I do have that social development paper. So that is something that can be accessed. But what I also want to say is a lot of it has to be tried and tested, because it's quite a new thing that is being talked about when we hear the words independent living. It wasn't really heard previously. We really thought about working with children till the age 18 and not now till this further young adult age. So I think a lot of it, what I've done is through these previous years that we've had these young people actually shaping what works, what doesn't work, and what works where and when, and trying to come up with something that actually fits in terms of residential care.
Fantastic. Okay. And let's just see. And in your PowerPoint, you mentioned 35% of CYCCs not having or the standards for an independent living program. You might have also again mentioned in the slides, but what are your main reasons for that, for such a low percentage?
I just missed the last of that. Did you say about the 35% of centres?
Yeah, why such a low percentage? What do you think are some of the key factors?
Yeah, to be honest, I think that it's actually moving forward with this ideology that we need to be able to support young people when they need it from 18 plus. And I think previously this wasn't something residential care was always looking at or thinking about. Often it was that notion that, when you're 18, you need to leave the centre. So we weren't really thinking about it in terms of how do we transition these 18-year-olds into young adulthood and create a space for them to be able to get the support that they need. And I think it's because of that, we haven't quite moved forward fully, that all of the centres can be able to do that. I think if we had a mentality that we were helping someone until the age of 18, that mentality can often stick. So we think, okay, we're helping them until they finish school. We're helping them until they turn an adult. then that's the support that we need to do. So actually seeing now that the guideline recognized by social development is that we need, and it's a must, it's not a may actually, it's a must, we need to be able to provide these spaces for young people post 18 transitioning to adulthood, means that a lot of people in the centers, even from a managerial perspective, need to be able to take a step back, reflect, and see how we can adapt our programs accordingly.
Okay, great. Okay, at this point, we're still taking questions. We don't have any on the chat box. It's possible that no one has any questions or comments. So I just want to again say thank you so much for your presentation and for the areas that you've covered. I think a lot of people that are attending this session are from CYCCs and are very interested, and this is their part of their work, and your presentation certainly covered all of that. Thanks. Oh, we have one popped up.
Why do we call these programs independent living programs? Oh, why do we call these programs independent living programs? Okay. Thank you very much. I got that now. Hope you can hear me. So why do we call the programs independent living programs? And I think it's a good question actually when we talk about that in terms of what is independent, what does it mean to be independent? And it's interesting because I think I touched on it in my presentation that actually all of
yes, all good.
Okay, did you miss that one?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, but you can hear me now.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, no, it's fine. I'll go back to my response to the first question. So I was talking about the why do we call it independent living program? So, and I think that's a very good question to ask, because actually, as I said somewhere in my presentation, we're also thinking about this notion of being interdependent, because all of us actually are reliant on people in some way or another.
In
that regard, we actually think about this idea of using the word independent. And another thing that I would say is that essentially this is a transitional program. So it's actually the transition to adulthood program that we are doing. And yes, it has been coined as independent living. I was nothing to do with that name. But I just wanted to say that I do completely understand why we would be asking those questions.
Thank you so much for that, David. Sorry, Harrison. We also have another comment and question. It's wonderful to see that individual considerations are important in this work. It makes all the difference. How large do you think independent living program group can get before it loses this? Please address ratios of young people to caregivers in your experience.
Thank you again for that question. I think it's actually a very important question to ask there. And I think it's important because whilst we move from care work, child and youth care work, to what I describe as a mentor for the young people, then we actually still need to understand that each young person has a lot of needs, especially when it goes into that transitional phase to adulthood. So therefore, in our experience at the center, we've currently got 6 young men, which is from the ages of 17 to the early 20s, as we said, and we have 3 up to 4 who's dealing with them with a lot of their higher education studies, work opportunities, and many other things that we have to look at for them. There can actually be a lot more things going on in that age range than when we look at some of the younger kids. So I would say if you're looking at an independent living program for males or females, you're looking at having about 6 young people of either gender that we can actually give targeted support to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Harrison. We don't have any further questions. So I just want to again thank you very much for presenting and sharing the content with us and answering the questions. And if there's any more questions from the audience, we hope that we'll send them to you separately. But thank you again very much.
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you very much for moderating this today. And of course, anyone is welcome to contact me outside of this for questions or follow-up, but really appreciate the opportunity and thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.